Welcome to another episode of Voices of Westminster. This is a project in collaboration of SR Mosaic and Historical Society of Westminster. And today I am so excited and pleased to interview Alok Sharma, as he is wants to be known as the friendly neighbor to this amazing township. But I would say that he is just an amazing personality with a good amount of information. And today I am so excited that we are going to chit chat with him and know more about his thoughts. Hello, Alok, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Namaskar. And let it go on the records of Historical Society. This is a nice, socially distant way of greeting. Namaskar. Namaste.
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 So, I would just wanted to check, what does West Windsor mean to you?
Well, I was born in India. So India is like my mother. If India is like my mother, Westminster is like my sweetheart. Okay. Because I chose to come live in Westminster and spend my time here in her company. So, in Hindi, there are two words, Janam Bhumi and Karam Bhumi. So India is my Janam Bhumi and Westminster, Karam Bhumi. Karam Bhumi is like the place where you choose to live, where you choose to work, and that's one place that you like choose, like unlike your motherland.
Yeah.
So I choose Westminster. I love to live in her company. I love to wake up with her. I love her. I love Westminster.
Oh, that is such a sweet thing to say. That's nice. So, and basically, where do you see West Windsor in 30 years?
Well, where I see West Windsor in 30 years is, wherever we want to take it.
Yeah.
In Alice in Wonderland, there is this incident where Alice asks Cheshire Cat, where do I ought to go from here? And the answer is, that depends on where you want to go. So where Westminster will be in 30 years, wherever like the residents where we want to take it. It's up to us where Westminster will be. So let's see, what are the unique selling propositions of Westminster? It's the first thing is commute. It's easy commute to New York City. Second thing is good school district. Third thing is basically it has a lot of open space, houses with backyards and front yards and very spaced township, preserved land and everything. And obviously there are good people. So in 30 years from now, if you see today, the way trend is going, work will become virtual.
Yeah.
Schooling is becoming virtual. I mean, you might live anywhere and attend any school.
Yeah.
So 30 years from now, those two things will probably be gone.
Yeah.
So what remains? I mean, people want to live with their friends. People want to live in good company. People want to live where other people they like live. So what will remain in Westminster and is the human capital. So as long as we have the human capital, good people living here, we will have a bright future.
Very nice. Very good thought. Actually, I agree with you. It's all about the infrastructure and everything will be here and there, but it's all about the values that we instill. So that's a very good thought. So is there somebody or some people or an individual who has inspired you in this town?
Well, I mean, the town has 30,000 people, close to 30,000 people. And I know a few of them in my circle. But if I look at my own circle, half of them are those who could inspire me. My sister Abha, single mom, raised two kids on her own. does everything for other people, like work, like wakes up early in the morning, works hard all day, takes care of the kids, and is like happy and makes everyone else happy. She is there. There is Meena Tomar and Prabhat Tomar, like raising kids, working two jobs, volunteering for scouts, like volunteering for cricket. There is Sajid and Simin Said doing so much for the community. There is, well, I mean, like if you look at the sports, Dr. Don Haas, if you look at Boy Scouts, Bob Dury. So, I mean, just in my circle, and these are not leaders or like they are not in any committee, just in my circle, half the people I can take inspiration from. So if I take this small sample and extrapolate it to the 30,000 people, there have to be 15,000 people in Westminster from whom I can take inspiration from, right? It's a very blessed township in that sense that like very good people live here. You take you toss a stone, and like half the time it will hit someone that like that can inspire you.
Yeah.
Don't actually toss a stone. I mean, that's metaphorical. Don't hit someone.
Yeah, nobody has to toss that stone there. But yeah, true. So, so you were involved with the Grover Farmstead Restoration Committee. So talk about your experiences with that, and just going on with that question on the similar lines, the building was ultimately torn down. So how can the township better support historical education and preservation?
Well, when Tommy Grover was fighting in the fields of Vietnam for our freedom, would he have ever imagined that there is a kid born in India who will one day come and try to preserve his childhood home?
Yeah.
That's how connected this world is, right? Yeah. But I am here, and I was pained about the mismanagement of that house, and it was Tommy Grover's childhood home, and as long as the Grover family lived there, it was very well maintained, and they did a lot for the community. School kids would go visit that farm. They'll have pumpkin patches and everything. And when the family left, after that, the township ended up owning it because of the like certain conditions that was in the lease. And then the property deteriorated completely to such an extent that at one time, finally it became uninhabitable. So the lesson from, I mean, yes, it was like a painful, like, I used to, I drove on the village road, and like, it was so beautiful. There was a rainbow behind it. And I wanted to paint it one day, make a painting out of it. But the lesson is a housing structure should always be occupied. If you leave it unoccupied, it will deteriorate. People will come, take things away from there. So there always has to be an ownership. And here the ownership was with the township, and somehow the property was like completely deteriorated. I would think like, the moment they knew that Mrs. Grover is going to leave the house, plans to leave the house, they should have found some occupant. They should have rented it out to someone. They should have put a caretaker, like rented it out to someone, basically. Just like, there has to be some ownership for every property, particularly house. There has to be an ownership. Otherwise, like, you can't maintain it. It becomes an abandoned house. It becomes a destroyed.
Yeah. So, do you think the township could have better support the historical preservation there, or?
Definitely. If there is any historical houses, right, or like, that significance that somebody gave their life for our country and his childhood home, and township is like going to come in the possession of that property after the person leaves. Yeah. See, if the person leaves, if he sells it to somebody else, they don't do anything about it. That's a whole different thing. But if the property is coming in the possession of the township, I mean, I would think the best way is to rent it out to someone, get some rental money, and like, keep the maintenance, keep the heating on. If you don't have the heating on, the plumbing pipes burst, like people come, steal the heating system, steal the copper wires, take the tubings away. So there has to be a continuous ownership of a property if you want to preserve it.
Yeah, true. So that's what I think eventually a lot of historical places like this will be coming up, and we need to preserve them because that's what we are going to pass it on. So so now leading my question to the one that made you and us so informed is WW Peeps. So, and you have taken a big lead in educating the community about COVID-19 research and the political developments. And hats off, like, I can just say that a lot of people follow you just to get the right amount of information. So that's a good thing. Like, your analysis and your research makes a lot of difference. So what do you think, what single item do you think has the capacity to have the most significant impact on Westminster?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is a very evolved virus. I mean, it is this successful because it is so evolved. I mean, it's evolved in basically two senses, that it escapes human detection, and it still is lethal. The first is that it spreads asymptomatically, right? So on one hand, it's like HIV. Like HIV spreads asymptomatically. For 10 years, you could be carrying HIV virus and not show any symptoms. This is not 10 years. This is like whatever, like, a few days pre-symptomatic. The people who are asymptomatic, it's like, for like whatever 10 days till they carry the virus. So that's asymptomatic spread. That's a very very unique thing about this. What was the last thing I said? So basically, there are two things important with this virus, and two unique things. One is that it spreads asymptomatically, and that is a big problem. If it was symptomatic, then it could have been defeated very easily, like we defeat other pathogens. I mean, there are other viruses that that spread asymptomatically, like the most famous of them being HIV virus. You can carry the HIV virus for years and like not show any symptoms. Here it's not years. Here it is like, in terms of days. Asymptomatic people will shed virus maybe like 6 days, 10 days. Pre-symptomatic people might shed virus, and that's a problem. So this virus is like a little evolved in that sense. The other important thing about this virus is that it affects different individuals very differently. So, I mean, there is a curve, there is an age-based curve and some precondition-based curve, but if you take the same age group, it's very unpredictable how this virus is going to affect you. Okay, it's unpredictable in the sense that we don't know. It's not unpredictable in the sense of it's like, that it's not like very mechanistic or like I mean, let me give this example. Let's say you make 100 clone of me. Okay, the fatality rate is whatever, like 3%, severity rate is 15%. If you make 100 clone of me and introduce this virus in the same way, like the same amount of virus to everyone, it goes in the same way. It's not like 3 of my clones are going to die and 15 are going into the hospital. Either all of them will die, or all of them will go to the hospital, or all of them will be safe. The unpredictability here is you don't know what bucket you belong to. Do you belong to the bucket of the severe case? Do you belong to the bucket of the fatal case? Or do you belong to the bucket of like, nothing will happen to me? We will learn about this. I mean, like eventually, so that's like the two surprising things about this virus. And I mean, it is changing it, and it should change our whole view about how we deal with pathogens, right? So before this, all our science and treatment used to be pathogen specific, not individual specific. What you call the host specific. Mm-hmm. And we anyway, even for other pathogens, we need to move to a model, to a treatment where it's host specific and not just pathogen specific. Different pathogens affect different people very differently based on genetic factors, based on how your immunity is. So it will become host specific. Now, the good surprise about this virus is one, obviously, like it's changing our way we think about pathogens. But just the super fast way in which drugs have been discovered and vaccine is getting discovered, yeah. And but that, I mean, like, look, but that is our sweet spot anyway. I mean, like, this pharma discovery, new molecule discovery, that's an American, like, American sweet spot. Like, we are the world leaders in that anyway. So like again, let me go back. What was, like, you asked, like, so, like, yeah, what was the other part?
The thing was that how do you think, like, because you educate the community about, the COVID-19 research, the political impacts and everything. So what do you think has the capacity, significant impact on Westminster? Like, the COVID-19, the political arena that's happening. So what do you think that will impact our Westminster, the small town?
Well, I mean, lot of people are getting a lot of construction done in their backyards. People are putting pools in the backyards. People are working from home. They want, like, they want their home to be better. There is a much higher demand for single family homes that have backyards and everything. People are, I don't know about, like, the impact on Westminster, but what I am hearing from my friends who are looking for, who are in Manhattan looking for houses in North Jersey, like Livingston and Milburn areas, there is nothing in inventory. And the prices have gone up like 25-30% since March. I mean, that's what they are telling me. I mean, I haven't checked that number. So this is a move, like, eventually, if it changes our lifestyle, more work from home. A lot of companies are saying that, like, they figured out. I mean, you don't need that much office space there.
Yeah.
At the same time, okay, now the bad news. Commercial retables, okay. Our shopping malls are empty. There is no rent coming. And unlike the house prices, like, unlike the house prices where, like, it's a transaction-based price, commercial retables are basically a multiplier on the income. So because these are investment properties, so, like, income is coming, you multiply by a factor of 8 or 10 or whatever the appraisal is. So those properties are going to get appraised down, if not this year, next year, otherwise year after that, if this thing, like, you know, if shoppers don't show up, and there is not that much demand for like stores and all that, if people are moving to online shopping. So, and well, like we already have, like, you know,
Yeah.
few commercial retailers. So as commercial, I mean, it's the same amount of money you like, you know, collect. Either you can collect it from the commercial retailers or from like residents. So if the expense is not going down of the township, if the commercial retailers are not paying, then like the property tax
Yes.
logically go up, and that's going to be a bad impact on us.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, pandemic has taught us a lot. So, what do you think that, yes, of course, and I'm very happy that we are a part of West Windsor Township because it has taken very good measures in terms of since the time we have hit this pandemic. So, but how can West Windsor, either its government or residents, better confront other pandemics or really any other emergency or external challenges? So what do you think in the future, how can West Windsor can confront?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, the most important thing in an emergency is not to lose your focus. I mean, you just can't afford to lose your focus. You don't have that many resources. I mean, like, you know, all the resources you need to use for the emergency. And how do you maintain the focus? You can maintain the focus if you understand the emergency well, right? And you could, to some extent, plan for it. Like, you know, you can have, like, you know, an emergency preparedness. So focus is important, because look, I mean, look, in any emergency, like, you know, it's always a tendency to go to the extremes. Either people can completely panic or be completely reckless, right? And you don't want either of those things to happen. So the communication becomes very important in any pandemic. And I mean, West Windsor has done pretty good communication from the mayor, from the health officer, and I mean, even the residents have done a very good job in that communication. But I think we need a very, like, a more systematic way of doing this communication during emergency, and that's like, you know, a whole business continuity plan type document that everybody knows, and, like, you know, and maybe drills for this, that, like, you know, send alert out, see if people are reading it or not, things like that. So that is important. This now this pandemic is like a different type of emergency. This is not like a snowstorm, or, like, you know, people losing power and all that, or, like, you know, some big accident, road closure, terrorist attack. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon.
Yeah.
This is a marathon, and what happens in these type of pandemics is you have to, like, manage the panic. Otherwise, fatigue sets in, and people just give up. I mean, like, you know, people are like, okay, you know, this is not going to affect me. You know, let me just go whatever I want to do. So fatigue sets in. So in that case, what's very important is, like, you know, you have to keep the communication constant, periodic. Give them updates, give them the facts, give them the reality. Here we are, so many cases, this is what we are doing, this is what you should be doing. So that communication flow has to be maintained, like, you know, if you want to be running this marathon and not just do, you know, like a sprint for 100 meters and then everybody sits and, like, you know, pandemic, like, I mean, you look at Europe. Europe is completely out of control at this point. Just this month, I think it's like 2.2 million cases by now, just this month. Like a few days back, they had like 200,000 new cases.
Yeah.
So, and like, you know, and I was reading about London. So the government said, we are going to close the pubs from this day. And immediately there was a, like, mad rush to, like, we had the toilet paper rush. There was mad rush to people to, like, you know, all the pubs, and they are hugging and everything. So what's the point of, like, you know, doing all that? So fatigue, there should not be a fatigue. You have to remember this is a marathon.
Yeah. And I agree because the communication part actually has been extremely good in our township, thanks to, of course, our mayor and all the township personnels, because that way there was no panic in our township.
Yeah.
So, rightly said that, we need to be more involved in this process and be more thoughtful about it. So, now moving on to the township. So, multiple township leaders personally, such as, like, the current mayor, the former mayor, the council members, community organization leaders. So, is there anyone you think should get particular recognition? And do you have any insight into the thought or the work process of these leaders beyond what is typically shown in media? Like, we always read in our newspapers, on the Facebook groups, and everywhere. Do you think that something that we are not aware of and they have been a part and parcel of it?
If I tell you, they will kill me. No, so no. Look,
It's just for the inspiration purpose.
I know present and past mayors and council people, or not just of this town, of other towns as well. And let me tell you this: West Windsor is a blessed town. Out the kind of elected representatives we have had in the past and we have right now. It's a blessed town. It's like, you see other towns and you kind of like, you know that, like, we are doing good. Uh, if like, if you ask me about elected representatives in the American context, I would say there are the good, the bad, and the ugly. We didn't have many ugly, like, like if you, so let me start from the worst. The ugly ones are the ones who are toxic, and for a small gain for themselves, small political gains, whatever, they will destroy the community. They won't step back from destroying the community. They are going to make people fight with each other. They are going to make, like, friends fight with friends, neighbors fight with neighbors, right? Toxicity is what they live on, right? Those are the ugly ones. Then the bad ones, well, I mean, look, why do we give power to these elected representatives? For them to be able to do their job. We are not giving them power because of who they are, or, like, it's not a certificate, it's not like some salary. So we the people are giving them power for them to be able to do their job. And the job should be important and the use of power should be secondary. That's a tool. For some people, that use of power, that becomes the primary. So the tail starts wagging the dog, right? So the power hungriness and, like, using it for corruption, that's the bad one. Now the good ones are the ones who are actually there as volunteers for serving the community selflessly. So that selfless service, I mean, that's the important thing for me. And West Windsor, like, have you seen toxic ones? Maybe a few, like, couple. Bad ones, no. Not that one. Mostly they have been good ones. But that does not mean that I haven't opposed, like, or supported every single elected representative at one point or the other. I mean, like, even with Hemant is my friend. He's like a family. But my first interaction with Hemant was when I were to defeat his school budget when he was the president. I didn't like the school budget and I want to defeat that school budget. That was years back. And, well, it is what it is, like, so. But like, if you want me to name one, like, Hemant is pretty selfless in volunteering to serve the community. Like, he does not care about, like, himself. He has this passion for serving. That's who he is, and that's why he is my friend. I mean,
Yeah.
Otherwise, it won't be my friend.
Yeah, that is right. So anybody else that you want to, like, say about, like, in the past, something that has been into notice?
No, I mean, like, I would say they were all good people. I mean,
Right.
one or the other time I have, like, provided unsolicited counsel to most of them. Sometimes they have taken it, sometimes they have not taken it.
Yeah.
I mean, previous mayor, Mayor Singh was pretty good. And like, we used to talk a lot. I miss those days. We used to talk a lot about the parks, the housing developments and all that. We might not have agreed on everything, but we were friends. I mean, like, we respected each other. So like, I see, that's the thing. Like, our elected representatives, they listen to the residents. I mean, they had like, nobody had any compulsion of listening to me, right? I mean, like, who am I? Like, nobody had any compulsion of listening to me. They give me a year. They give me, like, time. They heard me out.
Yeah.
And that I think, like, is important. And like, I like, most of our elected representatives in the past, I've been here like 15 years from now, have been really good people. They have been really good people.
So moving on to the infrastructure side, the zoning. So how do you think that West Windsor can best confront the projected population growth? So what infrastructural, zoning, procedural changes need to be enacted at the government, individual, or at the community level? Or it should just remain the same?
Well, I don't know what the projected population growth is. We are 28-30,000 right now. Maybe we'll go to 35 in 10 years and plateau out there. The population of New Jersey is not growing; it's stagnant. Household formation is stagnant. So I mean, you need people to buy all these houses or like come live there, right? So it's not like it's not going to be the last 30 years, like, that our population doubled. I mean, I don't think our population is ever going to reach like 60,000 or something. I mean, look, there is no land. There are like only a few tracts remaining. The biggest one being Howard Hughes, and that one is zoned for commercial. It should never be zoned for residential. Otherwise, it will be a disaster on the Quaker Bridge Road, for the schools, for Clarksville, everything. It's going to be. But no, but look, that brings me to the point, like, even about the current population. The problem with West Windsor is the peak demand. I mean, you look at it this way. So in March and April, all the roads were empty. Like, you could actually like ride a horse cart on these roads, right? And as things started opening up, there is like little more traffic. It's still like, pretty pleasant traffic right now. When, let's say, the schools were in full force and people were like, driving their kids for extracurricular activities after the school, that a peak demand at that time. And then the commuters add up another peak demand, like thousands of people going like, to the train station, lining up there. So it's literally the same problem that we faced for COVID, for the hospital beds, for the ICU beds, right? I mean, you have this much resource, right? Over a year, 2 years, we can take care of everyone. Like, everybody can get a treatment. Just make sure that not everybody gets sick at the same time. But in West Windsor, it happens like, twice every day, like in the morning and in the evening. We hit the demand. We don't have the roads for that. It's not just like, our roads. Even the train cars. Like, if you like see some train cars, they're going empty. Then there are ones you can't step in there. So there is this peak demand portion of like that, and that's unique to West Windsor. I mean, like, if it was not a commuter town and not this school age kids specific town, this population with this infrastructure, I mean, right now we are handling it very, very well, right? I mean, it's not like anybody is pained right now. We are handling it very well. But what can township do in this situation? I mean, one, don't rezone Howard Hughes for sure. There are a couple of other tracts. There is not that much land, let me tell you frankly.
It is.
Unless you start breaking down the single family homes and start building apartments, it's
Yeah.
not going to happen. And demand is more for single family homes now than apartments. So people want backyards, people want more land, people want, I mean, people come to Westminster because you have single family homes which are very distant. I mean, the thing that people come to Westminster. I mean, to buy houses. So don't do that. But to serve this population, if you want to serve this population with the same resources, I think we need to like make our systems more efficient. Our inspection system, permit system, all the township system, like whichever technology we use, however we engineer that process, we have to learn to do more in less. And I think there is like a lot of opportunity there to make our town more efficient for this population, or even if it increases by 5,000 more. I mean, that's the max. I think it will increase by 35,000.
Okay. Yeah. So another thing that you have written about the need for an optional Hindi class in around 2012 or something, in the community newspaper. So, what is your current opinion on the Westminster School District's current academic offering?
I mean, that I think that I don't know when I wrote that letter, but I think it was pretty far. It was pretty far back. But the need is still there. I mean, thanks for revisiting it. The need is still there. Heritage is a very important part of a person's identity. And we first generation immigrants, and I can talk from the Indian perspective only, but maybe others feel it, others don't feel it. We have a heritage and we have an identity as Indians. And but what about the kids? I mean, they don't have that experience of like living in India and going through that school system. And now, how do they recognize their heritage? Because there is a land out there, other side of the planet, where 1.3 billion Indians live. A 5,000-year-old civilization, right, has gone through all this and given the world so much. And that is a heritage. Like if you're an Indian, that is a heritage that you inherit. And we have to give it to our kids. We have to tell them, look, there is a bond. There is a natural bond between you and that 1.3 billion people living there. There is a natural bond, and here is the bond. And language is just one of the ways to do that. I mean, it's not about Hindi. It's because I speak Hindi. So and any language. I mean, you teach them Bangla, you teach them Telugu, you teach them. But my point is, teach them some Indian language. Have the second generation kids have to India, right? And I mean, I don't think it's specific to Indian. I mean, from any country where they come here, they do feel a bond to their country of their heritage. You can take the Greek immigrants, Italian immigrants, Polish immigrants, right? Taiwanese, Chinese, everyone. I mean, this is true for everyone. Like, look, America is a new world. That's the old world, right? It's called a new world. People from there came here, and there is always a linkage to there. I mean, we don't lose our identity even when we become Americans. We become Americans from our heart. But that's the whole thing about America.
But I feel learning a language actually connects you to the culture of that place. Like, for example, my daughter is learning French, so she is getting that cultural interaction. So if we learn Hindi or any other language, that means that you are encouraging people to get involved in the Indian culture and their traditions. So, yeah. Of course. So now, how well do you think Westminster does to promote and celebrate a diversity of cultures and identity? And how can the township improve if you're not doing enough on that?
You can write a book on this. So again, like, I can only speak from the point of view of a first generation Indian immigrant. Now, it might not be complete. It might not be like, I mean, let me put my thought together here. I would put like, look, so you live in American culture. Now, what is American culture itself is like, pretty open, pretty diverse to begin with. So like when you say American culture, like, it's very, very dynamic and open. And and like, like people experiment a lot of things, people explore a lot of things. So that culture itself is like, it's not some like, very set, hardcore tradition, ideological type culture, American culture. And I mean, it kind of proves like itself, like if you go to anywhere in the world, like, and I have driven through thousands of miles across, like, many continents, like through different countries. And you see that there are certain aspects of American culture that, you take Hollywood movies, you take our music, you take like denim jeans, you take like, the family values or whichever, like this, like, it's an enormous cultural, America has an enormous cultural influence in every country. So it is like, but now talking not, so that's pretty diverse, but like, but this town specifically, and like, our region, tri-state region, because of like, immigrants, and again, I can talk from the Indian immigrant point of view. So, I mean, look, there was no grocery stores, Indian grocery stores here when I moved in, not that many restaurants. Now there is everything, right? So that kind of demand, it follows the people, like, it follows the people. So your demand for that diverse cultural objects, right? Be it like Kathak dance classes, Bharatanatyam dance classes, Carnatic music classes, it's like, Indian restaurants, like specific Indian restaurants. I want a Punjabi restaurant, I want a Malabari restaurant. We have everything now, right?
Yeah.
So you have to demand. You have to demand, like, you have to demand those things, that like, this is my identity. This is what I want, and I want to buy this. I want to eat this food. I want this music. I want this dance. So like, then the supply follows demand. Like, in America, at least the supply follows demand. Like, okay, so there are certain universal things. I mean, like, sushi is universally liked. I mean, you don't need a whole big population of Japanese to be
like that.
to find a sushi shop.
Yeah.
Same Indian food. I have driven through like interiors of Argentina, Chile, Peru, Croatia, and Italy, Germany, France, and everywhere, even in the interior, you will have an Indian restaurant. There will be samosa. So certain things are universal. I mean, you like that's like practically universal demand over there, right? I mean, like, so Indian food is like that. Indian, like, Punjabi music is like that.
Oh,
and
yeah,
like,
it is.
I'm in a beach in Croatia, like, not one Indian origin person inside for miles, and like, oh, like, it's like big boom boxes playing some Punjabi music, and everybody like, what? So I mean, it appeals to everyone. That thing appeals to everyone. So I mean, like, American culture, like, see, what I think, and like, that I can be like, I don't care being politically incorrect about this or whatever. Like, I don't much care. I mean, it's just my opinion. Yeah. American culture is very good, but it's like, pretty crude in the sense of, like, so it's easily adaptable. It's easy to do. It's like, that's why it's like very popular.
Yeah.
But kind of like, even in our society right now here, the finer things are still coming from other cultures. The finer taste and all. Like, so that is like kind of one thing lacking. That I mean, we need to develop that in our kids, a taste for finer things. a taste for this is beautiful. This is why is this beautiful, and this is good. Why is why is this thing and those little differences between those things I can't say wine for the kids, but you can figure that out. So that is I think we need more more taste for finer things here. But I mean that's kind of from an Indian immigrant perspective, and then there is obviously, because even though I don't belong to one of those groups, but I definitely it's a big lacking thing, right? The inclusion of the marginalized groups,
Yeah.
LGBTQs and other minorities who where your demand is not enough to bring the whole the life.
Yeah.
Right? And for any cultural object, right? Whatever cultural object that is, right? And that we need to we need to I mean we need to do more about that. I mean, we need to ask them what we can do about them. I mean, frankly speaking, I mean, who am I to tell? I have a lot of friends who have a different sexual orientation, and I mean, things have changed in the last 20 years. Things have changed, and there is
a lot to do.
A lot of progress there.
Yeah.
But that's one area where we need where effort is needed, where just the demand, just people moving in, just the demand, or something having a universal appeal, because these things don't have universal appeal. I mean, it's not like some food or some cultural object that has universal appeal that things will, the supply will just get created.
Yeah, and a lot of things have to be done, as you said, about the LGBTQ. Actually the primary focus of this Voices of West Windsor is to get those kind of voices to be heard and to be documented, so that we are able to portray that, yes, as West Windsor Township, we were able to focus upon those issues which were not generally being dealt with. So, Alok, it was so nice to have this conversation. Frankly, we have never done so many variety of topics with anybody other than you. So our team was very happy to sit with you, and create these kind of questions, because you are like a knowledge bank for all of us, and just do the way you are. Just keep on updating and keep on make us, all the people, happy around you. That's what you are, and that's what make all of us happy there. So thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you. Bye-bye.